Ladies and gentlemen, mesdames, messieurs, welcome to the weekly show Then and Now with Jim Jatras, author of I Try to Warn You, available on Amazon, Kindle, and all your fine booksellers. I see in the comment section someone just bought your book, Jim, so there we go.
Yay.
It's worth doing the show. And of course, we're joined this week by Mrs. Rachel Wilson, also an author of the book, let me see my notes here, The Secret History of Women's Liberation.
And
She's also, there we go.
there we go.
Yay!
Yay.
She's also an Orthodox mother, and
very
of
lovely
course,
and talented.
the wife of Mr. Andrew Wilson of the Crucible fame. I see quite a few Crucible people in the chat, so welcome everybody. Glad to have you, Rachel. Very pleased to have you on. You know what? It's weird because I look back and like I thought I had you on before. I thought we've talked before, and this is the first time we have you on any of my shows. So thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, I'm super glad to be here with you guys.
Well, and thanks, thank again for Jim. No, I should say Jim should be thanking me because now, Jim, I brought the pretty lady on the show for you to look at. So
it's a big relief, I'll tell you.
You keep mentioning. Are you tired of looking at my
I know
aging mug? So we brought you on, Rachel, specifically to talk about the Soviet roots of modern day feminism, because you're writing a new book. You just said before we press play. Where would you like to start, since you are the Soviet feminist expert?
Yeah, so my first book, which has done far better than I ever imagined it would. It was quite a surprise to me, but it's been very well received and a bestseller in its category on Amazon multiple times. And so I think a lot of people watching may be a little bit familiar with the West. I covered the West in that book. Feminism is too broad to it would be, a whole giant set if I did the whole world. But I just kind of stuck to, mostly England, America, a little bit of Australia. And then when I was done with that book, I was so tired of working on it. Anybody who's written a book, Jim will probably tell you too. By the time you're done, you think to yourself, I'm never doing this again, ever. I'm never writing a book again. To heck with it. And then within 2 months, I decided I had to write a second one because I started reading some of the Bolshevik feminists and some of the Eastern European feminists, the Marxist communist kind, because there were two separate camps and they often didn't agree and didn't like each other. But it turns out they were funded by a lot of the same folks and promoted by a lot of the same people who wanted feminism for various reasons. And they even wrote letters back and forth to each other talking about that. And so this is basically what I do. I do your homework for you guys. I read all the boring, old, crummy writing of feminists from, the 1700s on. And I just tell you what they said, right? So a lot of people think I have these crazy ideas about women's liberation that I invented. And it's like, no, I'm just telling you what these people who started the movement said and what they wrote, because this was a time before radio and TV. So they were all writers. You had to be. And Alexandra Kollontai she'd be the main star of the book. She was in Lenin's cabinet. She was one of the most powerful women in the world, one of the first to have a diplomatic position, a major government position. And she was the head propagandist for the Bolsheviks and for Lenin's government. And then she even went on to work for Stalin, which baffles historians that she's the one person they couldn't figure out why he didn't erase her with most of the other old Bolsheviks. And they've thought, well, maybe it's because she was a woman and so he didn't think she was that important, or maybe she had something on he had something on her son and that's why she was forced to do it. But actually, one of the bombshells that we'll drop in the new book is that we now have discovered, not here in the US, I think I might be the first person to say this here, but my Russian sources, which I've had translated, showed that she was actually doing espionage work during World War II. She and another female diplomat, they were stationed in Sweden and Norway, and they were tracking Nazi troop movements for Stalin. And I do think she had family, her one and only son there still, and I think he probably did hold that over her head to get her to do that to some degree. But she became pretty jaded in her later years, so I don't think she was the utopian visionary she was in her youth anymore. So she might not have cared all that much. It's hard to say. But if you guys wonder where
also she wasn't Jewish. I mean, almost all those old Bolsheviks so maybe she didn't fall under whatever Stalin's ethnic preferences were at the moment.
Yeah, that could be too. Yeah, she wasn't Jewish, and it drives me
Mhm.
crazy because people, certain groups on the internet will be like, "Ugh, the Jews invented feminism," and if they had, I would tell you that, but that's
Yeah,
just not the case.
yeah, not
They
her
more
case.
jumped on the bandwagon later.
Mhm.
Uh, they're just kind of perpetual revolutionaries, so they love any revolutionary movement and
Yeah.
they'll jump on it and co-opt it. But no, Kollontai was really the author of what we now recognize as like the modern Marxist feminism that dominates the universities.
Mhm.
That, you know, anytime you see a crazy leftist Marxist feminist woman saying crazy things on TikTok or YouTube or Twitter, they're parroting her ideas, and she was a radical Marxist utopian. She got a lot of her ideas from people like August Babel, but she, as a woman, really took things to the next level. And
Mhm.
we can talk about like what she did and what ideas of hers they actually implemented in Bolshevik Russia and how catastrophically terrible they were, if you would like to.
Absolutely. You know, Lenin
I don't
once
want to just
said that.
yap the whole time.
No,
So,
no, please go ahead. You're the guest. Lenin once
well,
famously said that promises are like pie crusts; they're meant to be broken. And one of the big promises the Bolsheviks made early on was this sort of equal rights for everybody. It's almost where it's not that they started the idea of rights or equality,
right.
obviously, but they started to extend it into groups that normally we never even considered religious groups like the
Yeah.
Jews, obviously women with feminism, all the rest of it, and this became sort of like the big carrot that was hiding the stick. And obviously, as soon as they got power, then things began to be dialed back. But if we
Yeah.
look at communism in maybe in a strange way, and if we look at it within this concept I bring up quite often, which is the liberal frame, which contains all of liberalism, all of its offshoots, fascism, communism, all the rest of it, Zionism. Um, we then look at it as sort of like we're only discussing which ideology itemizes people better or best. And communism has a special way of bringing everyone down into a cog. You were literally just become reduced down to your component parts. We saw this in the Afghanistan war when Russian soldiers were sent back home, and they're obviously just times of ash with some boots, and they were given a price tag on how much everything was worth in the casket, from the
Mhm.
armaments to the ashes of the human being, and often the ashes of the human being worth less than the army boots and all the rest of it. And this is sort of the
Yeah.
category errors. So when we start to see that applied to things like feminism, now suddenly women who should have or have had in Christendom a divine status, even in the home, are reduced down to mere cogs. And that, I
Right.
think, becomes the true subversion of the human soul.
Well, the thing about Kollontai is that she, like I said, she was a really prolific writer. You can go to Marxists.org, the Marxist Internet Archive. They've got dozens and dozens of her essays, books, pamphlets. And she tells you she was very frank. The thing about her writing is she really didn't dance around anything. And she said that women's emancipation rested on their new identity as labor units. She said women needed to stop seeing themselves as mothers and wives and see themselves as units of labor. And she was very explicit about saying that in order to get rid of private property and property rights, we have to get rid of husbands and fathers. We have to smash the patriarchy because that's how, men's motivation to build something and leave a legacy and pass something on to their
Mhm.
children is the problem of capitalism. And if we can disincentivize men in every way possible to ever build anything and create a legacy, the property rights thing will just dissolve and people won't even care about it. And so the first thing she did as the Commissar of Social Welfare under Lenin was to abolish marriage as a sacrament of the church. It was no
Mhm.
longer allowed in Russia to be done under the church. She created just exactly what we have now, right? You go down to the courthouse, you get a certificate, a judge says, "Are you two married?" You say, "Yes, we're getting married." They stamp it, and now you're married. And she said that they should also have free and easy divorce with no fault, no show
Mhm.
cause, and it should be completed in as quickly as a week or two. And she said this
Just
was only temporary. This
just by
was
the registration of
temporary.
one party, yeah. Just by the
Yes.
registration. Was she involved in the legalization of abortion, which was also very
Yes, that
early in
was
the
That was 100% her idea. In fact,
Hmm.
she insisted on it. Lenin didn't like a lot of her ideas. Lenin thought she was too radical. He thought she was going to turn the women off. But and he didn't really believe in a lot of her ideas either. It was just, and most of the Bolshevik leadership, the men, didn't really care. They really didn't want to hear it from her, and this was something she wrote about a lot, her frustration that they weren't listening to her about what she thought was so important. They were
Hmm.
focused on getting funding, taking power, redrawing borders, getting support from powerful people in the international and things like that. That's what the men were concerned with. And they were like, we can worry about the family unit stuff and the new morality stuff later once we're in power. And she
Right.
made a very strong case to Lenin enough times that he started to listen. She said, look, we can radicalize the women and get them to support the revolution. And if you radicalize the women, we can really get this done. You can get the numbers that you need. You really can't do it without the women. And she said the best way to do this is through the university systems. We're going to get all the girls
Yeah.
that are in schools and in colleges to and we can send
Yeah,
our
that sounds
Marxist
familiar.
teachers in there and radicalize them. So it's really crazy reading her writing, because this is over 100 years ago now, and her plan and how she did it there is exactly what's been done here, and it seems to work. So she said, to mobilize and radicalize women to defend the revolution was to move their loyalties away from the family. You have to get women to stop thinking about the family. You have to get them to stop thinking that they're mothers and wives. And the reason she wanted to get rid of marriage, and like I said, the marriage registration or getting a certificate was supposed to be a temporary stopgap. Her ultimate
Hmm.
plan down the road was for nobody to even know who their parents were. And they started these like kind of hippie communes back then, where they'd have like the collective,
Hmm.
you live in a big building and everything is shared. There's a cafeteria, we all share bathrooms and everything. She wanted daycares also. They were called creches. She was the first to start a massive daycare program and send all the moms to work.
Well,
And she
well,
said
some of that's right.
eventually,
Right, and that is some of that is right in the Communist Manifesto that they want to abolish
yes,
marriage, have free love, and all that. And she was a big advocate of that.
yeah,
So, I mean, that's I know Lenin was against free love because he thought it was
mhm,
socially disruptive. They had what they
yeah,
call the glass of water theory of
that,
sexual
yeah,
satisfaction, and he thought it was opposed to that because it would be make people disorderly and undisciplined in their behavior. But she was I mean, she was on firm ideological ground there.
yeah. I'll read you just a little excerpt from her essay, "Communism in the Family" from
Yeah.
1920, just a short piece, because it really tells you exactly what she wanted. She said, the habitual morality of the present day, man permits him to demand a young girl that she remain a virgin until legitimate in marriage. But there were tribes among whom the woman, on the contrary, made it a matter of pride to have many lovers, decorating her arms and legs with rings to indicate their number. So she wanted women to have high body counts on purpose. And she said, such practices, which could not but astonish us, practices which we might even qualify as immoral, are found among other people who, in their turn, consider our laws to be sinful. And there's no reason for our becoming terrified at the fact that the family is undergoing a modification, and that gradually the traces of the past which have become outlived are being discarded, and that new relations are being introduced between man and woman. So she really strongly believed that we'd get to this point where women would be the ones that would take many men as lovers, and that no child would know who their father was. And I don't think she could foresee DNA testing, right? We're talking about 1920,
Hmm.
but she wanted for nobody, and this is an ancient pagan thing. They used to have, or this is a very occult kind of practice, a witchcraft type of thing, or a pagan type of thing, where you have full moon orgies on purpose so that nobody knows who the patrilineal lineage is. Nobody knows who their dad is. Sound familiar? Sound anything like today?
Hmm.
So this was intentional. We have to take men and neuter all of their reasons for having intact families. We have to get rid of the patriarchy. We have to get rid of fathers as a just on principle that the commune raises the child. Nobody has a father. So she wanted promiscuous, fatherless young women with high body counts. And you guys all know my husband has done over 100 episodes of the Whatever podcast, and I'd say we're there. I'd say that's just about where we are.
You know,
But
just to jump in for a second, I remember when
Yeah.
you and Andrew started going on the Whatever podcast, and then Fresh and Fit, and a few other ones a few years ago. And at first, I was very kind of put off by it because I didn't understand it. And then it wasn't just until about this year where it kind of hit home. It's like, no, you have to do this. Like, you have to go where this situation is. I also was probably naive. I didn't know how bad things had gotten until over the last year or two, where you're looking at these things, you're like, you see the OnlyFans phenomenon and all the rest of it, and you pay attention to the girls going on Whatever, and you realize how bad this has gotten. Like, the mind rot has gotten. It isn't just coming out of the universities now; it's coming out of society itself. It's almost like a spirit. This kind of falls into a lot of my work, looking at the tyrannical father begetting the devouring mother, begetting now the vengeful son, as we look at these sort of inverted spirits of the ages, to kind of give them names. And I feel if this kind of gets back to that revolutionary spirit, where we take the category of the father, the mother, and the child, which is a smaller trinity that's held within the household, and then you invert them and subvert them. So now the wise father becomes the tyrannical father, the divine mother or the nurturing mother becomes the devouring mother, and the prodigal son becomes the vengeful son. And the only way we can seek to unscrew ourselves, essentially, is to start to model the inverse of the inverse, right? The proper situation, which is why I keep telling people to return, repent, redeem. Become the prodigal son, model the prodigal son in all ways, so that we can start to flip this inversion back into something more proper. Just before we get into, because I want to attach this more to some of Jim's work. We have a bunch of people in the chat. The chat's taken off. Thank you so much. Remember, we have a $2,000 goal to get to the end of the month. We've just crossed over the halfway mark last night. So any and all support over either on YouTube or on Streamlabs is always appreciated. If you send in your comments or questions on YouTube or Streamlabs, I will read them out at the end of the show. So please send me your money. Send me your money. Okay, please.
Crucible Crew, you guys know what to do. The Crucible Crew knows what to do.
If Mama Marichuk's happy, I'm less stressed. So just make that happen. And I appreciate it all. If you can't send your money, just please like, subscribe, and share the channel. I appreciate all the support that you can. Of course, go buy Jim's book and go buy Rachel's book as well. Links in the description below. Now, that all being said, that was the mid-show grift. Jim, you said something very early on, I think in our first episode, and you said this in your book. I Try to Warn You by George Jatras, that the American establishment during the Cold War really didn't hate communism; they hated the Russians. Or that was, I'm paraphrasing you here, and that has really stuck with me, because sometimes you get these paper bullets, right, where it's just like boom, and then everything makes sense. And if you follow sort of Western responses to not just even to the Soviets, but even to the Chinese or any kind of like communist governments out there, they don't seem to be really opposed to communism. They just seem to be opposed to groups within that, within those countries. And so maybe we can expand on that, because obviously a lot of the communist ideals have been onboarded back home, or certainly during the Cold War, these ideas were festering. One of the things that really hit me was when I was doing some Chris Hitchens research, and I saw him on Charlie Rose back in 1995, and he was sitting around with like 3 feminists on a round table, and everything out of their mouth, it was like Naomi Wood and a few others, you would probably recognize them, and everything out of their mouth was what we heard coming out of social media in 2014. It's like verbatim. And I was shocked. Because I was like, oh shit. This has been around for a disastrously long time, festering. So I don't know where you want to pick it up for Jim, but from your own experience in the State Department, maybe we can make some of those inroads. Where did you see any resistances, or what was the reaction internally in the U.S. government to some of these ideas, or was it just completely porous?
Well, look, I mean, first off, let's relate it back to something that Rachel said earlier about the universities in Russia as being incubators for this kind of thing and targeting the women as kind of the weak link. I mean, for example, if you look at, have you ever seen the intersectionality wheel here, where basically you have all the axes of oppression by sex, race, religion, language, immigration status, et cetera, et cetera. And that's why you get things like that one video. What was it on? I forget which side it was about. We've got to talk about white feminism. It's basically, you have to tell white feminists to just shut the F up when, sisters of color are talking, because when you think about it, if you look at the demography of the United States in particular, given, the racial, ethnic, and other makeup of it, white women are the weak link in the preservation of anything like a traditional social, political, moral culture, because if you can flip them against their own families, against their husbands and sons and fathers, in favor of, sisterhood and our LGBT allies and everybody else, then you've got something like a close to the majority of the population that's with the revolution. And it relates to something else that Rachel said, is that as Kollontai made the case to Lenin, if you can get the women with you, you've got a revolutionary force that has to be reckoned with. You don't have that unless you can turn the women against the structures of tradition, which are not only religious and national, but also patriarchal. And so that's why, this is a theme that does not go away in the institutions that go. Now, how does that relate to what you said about Russia? Unfortunately, I think we tend to have a tendency to look at these things in terms of dichotomies. Well, there's the Soviet Union, they got communism there. We've got capitalism over here. And by the way, capitalism is basically a Marxist term too. I mean, boiling it everything down to economic systems, when that's the least of it. There were strains in the United States that had a deeper, I would say at the popular level, had a deeper appreciation of what the differences were. Like, for example, when, the Knights of Columbus, the Catholic men's group, insisted on putting under God in the Pledge of Allegiance, because we want to tell American kids that this is our God-fearing Christian country against the forces of atheism over there, the godless communists. Okay, I can appreciate that. But in terms of the establishment, and I think we saw this more and more as time goes on, their ideology was not fundamentally different from communism in the Soviet Union. They were materialists, they were globalists, they were progressives. They believed in, that all these distinctions about that human society based on our family and ethnic and other ties, ancestry, religion, that these are all false and artificial and need to be driven away. They may have had some differences in terms of what the nature of which axis on the intersectional wheel is the actionable one. For Bolsheviks, it was the economic one, bourgeoisie against workers. But there are many other. This is where you get the Marcuse and Gramsci and people like this, who are, this. I don't like this term cultural Marxism, but there's an element of truth to the term, because they're applying the Marxist dichotomy to all these other axes of oppression and victim. And in fact, and again, this is where I said back to Kollontai, she actually had a pretty good pedigree for her argument in Marxism itself. It was never strictly an economic doctrine. So if you look at these terms, the ruling classes in the Western countries that were just as, supposedly anti-communist. First off, a lot of them were social democrats anyway. They traced their roots to Marxism anyhow. In fact, I was just looking up Alexandra Kollontai, and then I also looked up Rosa Luxemburg. And when she and Karl Liebknecht got shot during the uprising in 1919, so, good things do happen in history, that the ones who shot them were social democrats. They were Marxists too, so the establishment we had in these countries shared the same moral, historical values as the communists. They just disagreed a little bit about methodology. And that's why, when, again, serving at the State Department, when I really was an anti-communist, I had very few actual allies there. Most of them said, oh, well, yeah, sure. But, our opponent is the Soviet Union because they occupy that space over there. And it's the same game, the South, basically, I would say the American empire's opposition to Russia is our quest for global domination, the fact that somebody's in the way, and that we tend to treat Eurasia the way the British Empire treated Europe. In other words, We are the balancer on the outside that will keep it in war against one another, making sure nobody can unite so we can dominate them. And that's, the empire of chaos. And that's what we do to Eurasia in order to dominate Eurasia, the same way the Brits dominated Europe for several centuries. And in fact, as you know, Jason, it's the same empire. It's the same Anglo-American empire. There may be different nodes of influence and leadership within it, but as we know through the Five Eyes and the other things, it's basically the same operation.
And just as a shameless plug, if you folks haven't checked it out before, go over Gumroad and buy yourself a copy of Tales of the Shadow Empire. That I detailed last year, the connections between the city of London and its subordinates through everything from to the economy to trade routes and to what we're seeing in the wars. And then we're laying the groundwork. Hopefully, Rachel will have you back on to start doing volume 2, where we're going to start looking more into the shadow churches and the occult, because I think that's something that a lot of people have talked about, but very few people are putting in perspective of politics. They tend to take this thing as a separate thing. Like there's, it's a separation of church and state, which is a big giant lie. Because as soon as you become a follower of any religion, no matter what religion that is, you're carrying that religion inside you. So whatever you're working, whatever you're doing, there's a religion. There's the church is within you. So when you have an inverted church,
how are you supposed to make laws? Law is supposed to be based on some notion of morality, and you're going to get your morality from whatever your religious beliefs are. There's no real such thing as atheists. But to build on what Jim was saying, so Kollontai, she was actually trained in the universities in Europe under the Fabian socialists. She had a lot of Marxist teachers in Germany. She spent some time in England with the Fabians, and then she came to America and did like a little press tour here with a bunch of American Marxists as well. So there was this. Jim's right. It's not like people think there was this like Western capitalist versus Eastern communist dialectic, but it was mostly manufactured. And if you've read my first book, I talk about how the CIA pushed feminism as part of the Cold War strategy. And the same thing was kind of going on with the Marxists, where it was partially to fill the factories in Russia at the time. They needed more labor, and it was tough from them switching over from this kind of they were still part of the old world where they weren't as modernized and industrialized yet, and they wanted to push women into the workforce as much as possible. But that's tough to do when you're a peasant woman with no birth control and you're having an average of 5 to 7 kids. So naturally these people were struggling, and what a lot of what feminism does, and this was certainly true in Russia, they took the ills and the growth pains of the Industrial Revolution and all of the problems that caused for so many people with urbanization and poverty, and they blamed it on the patriarchy. And they still do it to this day. They'll say, look at all the horrors that women suffered. They needed to be liberated. And it's like, wait a minute. They weren't suffering horrors at the hands of their evil husbands who were, abusive. A lot of that was also fake propaganda. They overinflated that to make it seem like every husband was a drunk, abusive person when that was hardly the case. And if you think about it for just 5 seconds, are we supposed to believe that until 1920 or 1969, that every man who ever lived who had sisters, mothers, daughters, wives, that they just hated these women and wanted to oppress them and keep a boot on their neck? It doesn't even make sense. Why would they, provide for them and protect them and, sacrifice so much for them? It doesn't make sense at all. So a lot of what was happening was this industrialization causing a lot of poverty and strife and problems for women. And what they thought they could do was kind of exploit that and say, see, the problem is your husband, the problem is your father, the problem is the church. And what Kollontai did, she was masterful at this. She said, you don't need them, you need the state. Lenin should be your husband and your father. Lenin is your daddy now. And that's why the abortion stuff was such an important part of her plan. Now, what she did was made Russia the very first country in the world to have not only legal abortion, but it was paid for by the state in state hospitals, no questions asked, right up until birth. Again, might sound familiar to according to what some people want to do in this country right now and other places. And the reasoning for this was she said that the point of a woman's life shouldn't be family, it should be work. We should be pushing the revolution. We should be working toward the revolution, and everything else comes second. And now here's the silly thing though. She said, "Well, we'll just have daycares and we'll communally raise the children, and that liberates the women." And it's like, all that does is take the child rearing and the housekeeping and put it on other random like it's still going to be women. Right? So, but instead of you doing that in your own home, now some random lady is raising your kids. So it was really crazy, and it didn't last very long there. Like it was largely a failure. And a lot of these places that they've tried it in Israel too. Israel had a period of trying to communally raise children in daycares that went horribly wrong. Because what happens is the abuse rates go through the roof, as you would imagine, especially certain types of abuse go through the roof when neither mother or father are there raising their own children. And the worst part was that by the time Stalin took power, Russia had gone to the point where they had 3 abortions for every 1 live birth. And this is just having come out of their civil war and famine. And it was catastrophic. And Stalin said, "We're not going to have a country. Like within a decade, we'll be overrun by our enemies and that'll be it for us." So he reversed it. He actually made it illegal again. But Russia to this day is struggling with the legacy of abortion
Mhm.
and free love and
Yeah,
women's
because
liberation.
it was
They're still
re-legalized
trying to.
under it was re-legalized under Khrushchev as part of
Yeah.
de-Stalinization.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, if you guys want to know where all these ideas came from, it largely came from her. And it was very much, unshockingly, because it's what she wanted for herself. So, in her own life, she got married, had 1 child, and decided, the revolution started, and she wanted desperately to be an activist. She wanted to be famous. She wanted to be recognized. She was very smart. She spoke like 7 languages, very prolific writer, very smart lady, came from an aristocratic family, as most of the diehard Marxists did. And she wanted a life of adventure. She didn't want to be at home being dutiful. She wanted
Mhm.
to be famous and important and, dictate policy and run around with the revolutionaries. And she had numerous lovers. She fits the profile of almost every famous feminist activist that I've ever profiled. They all get divorced. They all leave their kids. They all become very promiscuous, and as they get older, start to have lots of affairs with far, far younger men, which is another thing that we're seeing now. Have you guys ever noticed, if you follow me on X, the amount of teachers in this country, female teachers, who are getting
Mhm.
busted for having relations with young male
Mhm.
students? It's
I
it's a
have noticed, yeah,
phenomenon that is
yeah.
it
What do
is
you what do you think
crazy how often
what
it
do you,
happens.
what do you think the roots of that are really? Because I mean, other than like, okay, young men, yeah, okay, obviously like more attractive, more virile,
Well,
right?
yeah, I
Like,
mean,
yeah, yeah,
yeah, I somehow I
better
don't think that young men feel all that victimized in these cases.
exhibit A and B at the top of your screen here, folks, and why women might be turning to younger men. But
Well,
you're welcome, Jim.
I think it's far more insidious than that. So like
Mhm.
Kollontai being this powerful, wealthy relative to being a Marxist where you're supposed to
Mhm.
renounce your possessions, but she still
Right.
dressed like the press would always say she dressed kind of fancy. She was dressed like a well-to-do woman, and she would
Mhm.
try to say, "Oh, I just have a little apartment that I share with people," and things like that. But the truth is she was traveling everywhere all the time, gallivanting all over the world, having affairs, and she had access to lots of fineries, let's not kid ourselves. But she being wealthy, powerful, and in her 50s was dating and then eventually married a guy, what I think he was 19 years old, from a peasant family, kind of an army brute type of a guy, and got in herself into all kinds of trouble with him, got criticized for that relationship quite a lot.
He's not the one who got shot in 1938, is he? Okay,
Yes.
I wondered about that too. How she managed. I mean, if you're married to a guy who gets shot, that doesn't bode well for your longevity either. Back in 1937, 1938.
Well, I think he suffered a wound in the military, but later when she said she wanted to divorce him and leave him, he
Uh-huh.
shot himself and survived. So there was
Oh.
that too. But
Mhm.
um, she was often criticized for doing this sort of thing. And when we see it here in the United States, you see teachers that are having relations with boys that are 11, 12, 13, 14 years
Right, that I
old.
haven't seen. Yeah.
I I think it's a power dynamic kind of a fantasy thing.
Mhm.
I think it's a, you know, female teachers are probably some of the most Marxist radicalized women that we have in this
Mm,
country. They're
mm,
women who go into education in this country just get so radically Marxistified that I think they have this it's like, I think it's a weird perversion of like the motherly instinct and then this
mhm,
power dynamic, you know,
mhm.
you could tear apart the psychology if you wanted.
Mhm.
All I know is that it's really creepy and I see
Who's your
this
mommy?
over and
Who's
over.
your mommy? Who's your mommy?
Margaret Sanger did this. A
Yeah.
lot of these women that I profiled in my book, they get into their 40s and 50s and they're chasing after underage guys. It's just a very bizarre, twisted dynamic. And um, but just all that to say, Jim's right about the fact that there it really wasn't about communists versus capitalists. These people agreed on
Mhm,
a lot and they were willing to synthesize all kinds of different aspects of what they believed and work
mhm,
together if it was going to get them power. And they were funded by a lot of the same people. Anthony Sutton's book about the funding of the Bolshevik Revolution by Wall Street, they had a lot of wealthy Western benefactors, and the same people that were funding the Fabian socialists in England were
mhm,
funding a lot of the Marxists in the East. And yeah, they were also the other reason they wanted women in there was for espionage purposes. It was
mhm,
very easy to use women as spies to get them to transport money, things like that. They'd sew the money into their skirts. They would hire women and make them assassins. They were pretty
mhm.
successful female assassins because you could sneak them into, you know, areas where male revolutionaries would be too obvious and probably not
Yeah.
be let in. So
Let me ask you a question about back to the West again and some of the parallels, specifically when it comes to things like, as I recall, Playboy magazine had some early connection to the CIA, and
yeah,
there intelligence agency uh, involvement in some of the what you might, for want of a better word, libertine movement, promoting libertine movements in Western societies. Um, and of course, you look back on that, and some people say, "Oh, they're exploiting women." It's they're not patriarchal, but they're promoting an ethos where women are exploited for sexual purposes, but at the same time, they claim to be big feminists too.
right.
So, I mean,
Yeah.
where does the mix fit in between uh, not just free love, but sort of degrading the whole, obviously pornography and everything else, degrading the whole moral tone of society, but not coming from Soviet agents in the United States, but coming from the establishment in the United States and in Western societies.
Well, the whole idea is to get women to rebel and revolt against motherhood, primarily,
Yeah.
motherhood in the family, because, like Susan B. Anthony in her History of Women's Suffrage said that the primary stumbling block and
Yeah.
obstacle to women's liberation was women themselves. That most women back then were actually far more conservative than the men, because in a time before birth control and abortion being like legal and acceptable
Hmm.
and women's promiscuity being cool, the way that women kind of, I call it the sisterhood, right? The way that the sisterhood worked was, hey girls, the way that we get the best possible deal from men, the way that we get protection and provision from a man is to remain virtuous and be asked to be married, and then we give, in exchange for provision and protection, we give a man his children and raise his family. This is
Hmm.
the best deal for us. It's the most stable. It gives us the best chance to survival, the best chance of our offspring survival. So don't screw it up by slutting around, okay? And the sisterhood was pretty good at policing each other that way.
Well,
Now it's
that's why I call marriage is called matrimony. It's the establishment of the mothers to oversee that part of society. It's interesting. Matriarchy, as you know, really doesn't exist in history.
right.
Patriarchy does. Feminism is not matriarchy. It's
No,
patriarchy is based on the creative essence of God the Father, and that being replicated in the society and in the family. Feminism isn't matriarch. It's not. In other words, it's based on sterility. It's
right.
opposition to the creative, loving impulse of fatherhood, and it simply is anti-patriarchy. It's nothing more than that.
Well,
Yeah,
there's
exactly.
there's there's the homosexual angle as well,
Well, we
right?
haven't gotten to
Because
that yet. Yeah. I'm
yeah,
sorry, but
well,
I interrupted you. You were going on from I forget where your train of thought was. I'm sorry for interrupting.
No, that's okay. That was good that you jumped in there and said that because it's absolutely true. There
Oh
is
yeah,
no
because the
matriarchy.
women are overseeing all this stuff. You were talking about
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, and what these people want, it's I wrote a whole essay that I presented via video to some theological seminary in Russia
Hmm.
about this exact topic, that feminism is not about even establishing a matriarchy. I think a lot of people get that wrong. Yes, it's
Hmm.
because women want power, but it's more based out of resentment toward God the Father and the natural hierarchy, which is a patriarchy, and Christianity is a patriarchal religion. That is a good thing, but they've done a very good job of advertising it as a horrible thing and making motherhood slavery. I mean, how many times if I had a dime for every time somebody told me that I was a slave, because I'm married to my husband or because I have 5 children or because, I don't have my own money and do my own thing and tell Andrew what I'm going to do and when I'm going to do it. I mean, women really believe this. We've done a great job of convincing them that motherhood is a ball and chain. It's going to ruin your life. I was told when I had my first daughter, my life was over. I was never going to do anything. I was never going to be anything. And I think the reason, I mean, I don't even have to think. I don't have to guess because Kollontai said that work was the ultimate purpose and that to revolutionize women, we have to tear them away from the family, get them to see themselves as labor units and to see working as the primary goal of life and life's most important objective. And the reason for that is because you have to destroy the cooperation between men and women. You have to destroy the family to disincentivize people from wanting to leave a legacy. This is what we were talking about at the beginning. As a man, if you know that your wife can just get bored with you, she doesn't even you don't have to do anything to her. You don't have to abuse her. It's just, I'm bored. I don't feel sexy anymore. I've been with this guy for a long time and I want adventure. So I'm just going to tear apart my family. I'm going to divorce him. Mr. Johnson down the street makes me feel sexy. I'm going to move myself and the kids in with Mr. Johnson instead. If you know that a woman can just do that on a whim, or maybe her friend did that and her friend's telling her how great it is, because this is a real phenomenon. There was a study they did in Britain that showed that you're like 200% more likely to divorce if someone in your friend group does, and that it's like a social contagion in friend groups, that if one woman has an affair and leaves and gets divorced, the other women tend to do it. If that's the case, as it is, and this is why we're seeing young men completely opt out, they're just not dating, they're not getting married because they're like, why would I invest everything into a marriage and a family when my wife can be convinced by a podcast or her friend or the guy she works with, because all the women go off to work and they have a work husband. You guys heard of the work husband? She can just leave me, take all my children, take half my money, and I'm zeroed out at 40 years old and have to start over. No thanks. Why would I want to do that? So this was all by design. It was on purpose because they didn't want men to have a reason to acquire property, build a business, leave a legacy. And what do men do if they don't have a family? They go to work and they tend to work for the corporation and or the state. And then you've got the women doing the same thing. The women devote their lives now to a cubicle. You're liberated from your husband, but all day long you sit and take orders from your boss. You take orders from the cop if he pulls you over. Women will submit to anyone now besides their husband. Anyone, right? Every other authority they'll submit to except a husband because that's abuse. And this is by design. They didn't just wake up one day wanting to do this. It's not just women's nature. I've heard people say that too. Oh, it's just women's nature. No, 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 no. This
well,
is
yeah.
150 years of propaganda. It's billions and billions of dollars through NGOs. It's the CIA. It's governments pushing it. It's the family court systems, which if you ever look into the payment processors of the family court system and who makes all the money off of that and where it goes, that'll tell you a lot about why this is going on. So this is all by design. It's not accidental. And I always say there's a reason that you see three things that happened at once: the compulsory education system in America, the women getting the vote, and then the Federal Reserve Act and the income tax all happened within a couple years of each other. So you get women out of the home, you get them into the workplace, because they're in the workplace, the children have to go somewhere. So they go to the compulsory schools where they can be, given the state's values. Whoever's teaching them, the Marxist university professors who train the teachers, can instill those values in the children. And now you've got a giant machine that works for the state and or corporations, depending on what. I'm sure Jim has something to say about that, but yeah, this is not accidental.
No.
Let me just jump in really quickly because someone said something in the chat that I think is apropos, because I've been seeing this quite a bit and reacting to it. Not so erudite on a few of the debates have made this idea that feminism good because GDP go up. It's essentially saying that feminism good because it's creating more workers, and more workers create more innovation, yada yada yada. Right? This is literally I've seen this now play out. I think this is a destiny point that's just being modeled through all his little clones. But GDP go up equal good. So therefore, everything that makes GDP go up is also good. This is crayon eating level analysis.
It's also GDP goes up and wages and salaries go down, because what you've done is saturated the workforce with, not necessarily 50% more people, but a lot more people. And of course, it's taken for granted now. You don't pay a salary to somebody that you can support a family on. You pay a salary that's half of what a family needs to survive.
Yep. Exactly. And people will say this to me all the time too. They'll go, but Rachel, we can't just tell all the mothers to stay home because the economy is not made for that. And I'm like, all you have to do is go back and look at what happened from 1970 to about 1985. And within those 15 years in this country, we doubled the workforce by telling all the women to go to college. And why did this happen? Because of the invention and creation of women's studies departments by the Rockefeller family and the Ford Foundation, where they started this huge campaign to push women to college until this was this huge campaign, and the poor boomers got the worst of this. Just that women, hey ladies, if you don't have your own education and your own money, your husband's going to become abusive. He'll turn into an alcoholic and hurt you just because he can, because you're vulnerable, because you're trapped and you don't have your own money. And I grew up with this being pounded into my head too, and all my friends as well, right? It was like, when I said I wasn't going to college, oh my God, you would have thought, that I was joining a cult or had announced that I had a heroin habit. Like, the women in my family just freaked out. It was like the worst thing that could happen. Rachel's gonna not go to college and she's gonna have
of course,
kids.
The irony is now that colleges are so female heavy now, and that boys are so superfluous in many respects in higher education, that's now becoming more and more of a trend for boys to say, I don't need college. I'm going to go learn a trade or learn a skill. And maybe that's a really good thing, while the girls are out there learning all sorts of dumb stuff in dumb places.
Oh, yeah. I've said all the time in debates that if you look at the top 20 jobs held by women now and the top 20 jobs held by women 100 years ago, they are almost exactly the same. It's just that we swapped farm labor for HR work. And women are doing the same stuff they used to do. How's this for a deal, ladies? You still just get to teach children, cook food, do bookkeeping. You could be a retail worker, a psychologist, or a nurse. You could be an elder care worker. These are the jobs women do. The same shit we used to do at home without having to pay for a daycare person to watch our kids, and without having to pay income tax for the privilege of doing it, and then have to apply for days off and all this. It's one of the biggest scams in all of history. And when people want to tell me that I'm some kind of slave, it's like, I get up in the morning every day for the last 15 years, and I decide what my priorities are, what's important to me, what needs to get done, when I'm going to do it, how I'm going to do it. If one of my kids gets sick or I'm not feeling well, I don't have to call anyone and get points and worry about getting fired. There's none of that. So it's like, what liberation exactly? How are these women so free? But that's kind of just a little bit of a tangent.
And that also points to something else that's a huge part of what's going on, and that's antinatalism. In other words, I think part of this, remember back in, when did zero population growth and the concern about overpopulation become a really big thing? It was like the 50s or 60s. I think they really started to hype that. And then, but that dovetailed with all these other things that basically, the bottom line was sterility, infertility, have fewer children. just by happy coincidence, I suppose, having nothing to do with nothing, the testosterone rates started to plunge around that time, which in a normal world, you'd think, hey, this looks like a public health crisis. We should be concerned about that. But of course, we're not. It just, I mean, it seems that there's so much conspiring that simply say, at least in developed countries, fewer babies, fewer people.
Yes.
Well,
Yeah.
in a weird, it's a perverse inversion of The Handmaid's Tale, right? Because The Handmaid's Tale, which I'm Canadian originally, anyways, we were all forced to read a whole bunch of Margaret Atwood back in high school, and the big thing of in the Handmaid's Tale was like, these religious right kooks are gonna hold you down and do all the awful things to you, make you birthing factories, and it's like, actually, that's the communists and the liberals who are going to do that. Actually, that's liberalism is going to do that.
Well, now they can do that for pay for gay couples, so it's okay.
Well, yeah, and there's a homosexual angle because a lot of my analysis, especially in media and otherwise, comes from I apply a Girardian standard to it. So you look for models, right? All desires are external. People don't know what to want; they have to be told what to want or shown what to want, and so we look for the models. And if you look at everything from a homosexual angle, it percolates directly into the female sphere. Even if you apply that to even to standard porn, if you're even watching heterosexual porn, it's actually just really homosexual porn because the image always, the focal point is always on the male, right? So so you're getting a full look at the guy's package at all times. Not to get too crude, but that is, and it's modeling sexual behavior for women. Yeah, I know. Sorry, Jim. But it's modeling sexual behavior for women, and you see the Nyla Rays and all the rest of it doing positions that basically appeal to a homosexual audience, a male homosexual audience, to be honest with you, right?
Well, at the root of this stuff, whether they know it or not, all of this stuff is satanic inversion. That's why I thought my first book was going to be about the funding and the CIA and all that stuff regarding feminism. But as I'm looking into the lives of these women and profiling what really went down, they were all either occult practitioners, open Satanists and Luciferians, or they were doing things where they might as well be. Margaret Sanger probably wouldn't have called herself that, although she did dabble in Rosicrucian rituals and things like that. But she was very much probably the main antinatalist propagandist of the 20th century. You could say Marie Stopes in England was a close. She was like right there too. She was their Margaret Sanger. But this was part of the Malthusian agenda 200 years ago too, that they were kind of carrying on. And the eugenics program is completely tied in with feminism. You cannot separate eugenics from feminism, from antinatalism. It's all the same idea. And that's where you get this, it's this kind of Gnostic idea of like, human beings bad, being born is bad, because if you're alive, you're suffering. But if you're going to have to be alive and suffer, you might as well party till you die and have the orgy and have the 7 different boyfriends and live in the commune and do what you want because Sky Daddy is mean and tries to tell us what to do. It's like this very satanic, rebellious spirit that you see going all the way back. And none of this is new. That's why I start the book in the ancient world, because this is a spirit that's been here with us from the beginning.
It all throws up.
And we're just seeing it spread so much now because of the printing press and mass media and propaganda. It's just gone worldwide like a virus.
Yeah, it's funny. You take the James Lindsay's of the world, and I won't harp on James Lindsay too much, but years ago he was on. He a friend of yours. I forget her name right now. You appeared on her show, but she had on Jay Dyer and James Lindsay on to talk about the Gnostic roots.
Courtney. Yeah, Courtney Turner.
Yeah. Courtney Turner had them both on, and I remember watching that and doing a reaction stream on that because Courtney's been on the old podcast. And it's interesting to watch, guys. It's interesting to watch people who get like this much data. Like they're almost there. You're there. You're almost there, and then they just veer off because it's like this weird self-hatred mechanism. James Lindsay is sort of a token for a large cadre of people who call themselves anti-communists, but yet they support all these things that have direct ties to communism. This is why I came up with the verbiage that the liberal frame, which is coming right from Father Seraphim Rose in his book Nihilism, because what we're starting to see now is this. What really hit me in that book, he talked about vitalism being a form of nihilism, that these two things are interlocked. that it's you people would see vitalism as a corollary to nihilism, right? It's vitalist, it's positive. It's like no, there's nothing there. It's all of the same beast. It's just a different version of it. It's all ways for the adversary to get you off the path. And when you start to examine the liberal frame is in the same context, that all of these things, classic liberalism to Zionism to fascism, communism, all the rest of it, all have the same end result. They might get you there differently, but it's all the end result because liberalism equals Luciferianism. Point final.
It's sort of like it's kind of like a negative perennialism. There are many different roads to Satan.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point.
I got a question. I got a question, Rachel. Did you, in any of your work on this, did you run into anything having to do with objectivism and Ayn Rand? Was there anything in that philosophy or that movement that connects to any of this?
Well, sure. I mean, Ayn Rand was a notorious coomer too. She, bless her heart, she didn't have the face for it, but she sure got around quite a bit. And
Yeah.
I think, well, these are two wings of the same revolutionary bird, right? The reason they're called the right wing and the left wing is because they're both born out of the revolution, and they're just two different paths to get to the same place. And so this liberal ethos, like that's what Jordan Peterson and James Lindsay and all that whole crew does, right? We hate the communists. We are good classical liberals, and I think you should be able to do what you want so long as you're not hurting anyone else. And whenever someone says that, what they're telling you is, I like to do butt stuff, and I don't want anyone telling me that I can't do my butt stuff. I'm sorry, but that's always at the end of the day what it comes down to, is that they're into some degenerate thing, right? And they're like, what I do in the privacy of my own bedroom, right? I mean, how many times have you heard the classical liberals say that? So
privacy of my own butt stuff.
Folks, it's a new drinking game. We're going to see how many times we can make Jim blush in one. Every time we make Jim turn a new shade of red, we got to take a drink, okay?
But I mean, that's basically all of this is to defend degeneracy and erase stigma. And that was what Kollontai wanted.
Yeah.
You know, most of what she argued for was, hey, if I want to play around and have a high body count, there shouldn't be stigma. I can still be a diplomatic head of state and have 18-year-old boyfriends when I'm in my 50s, and nobody should be able to shame me for it. And Ayn Rand, a lot of her philosophy kind of distills down to that. I mean, Andrew calls them coomers, notoriously. That's his nickname for people who are into degenerate stuff, and they will argue intellectually, you know, to try to defend their degenerate proclivities as, hey, you moral majority meanie heads trying to tell us what to. That's why they hate the patriarchy, right? Nobody wants their dad telling them, hey, you can't do that. So it's this revolutionary mindset.
You know, I was, you know, I'm always mystified by conservatives, so-called, who have a thing for Rand, and I said, look, she's basically just a communist. The only thing is she just replaces the word collective with individual. But if you reduce all the individuals to atoms that are not connected to anybody else through a social structure, you know, family, religion, all that, nation, all that kind of stuff, how are they indistinguishable from all the nameless, faceless cogs in a communist collective? They're exactly the same thing.
Yeah, she wanted to erase identity too, basically. That's what her whole philosophy distills down to, everybody erasing their identity. And that's why, like, in my book, I talk a little bit about how a lot of this is why the New Age and monism and a lot of these occult ideas fit so well with feminism, because they're against patriarchy, they're against you know, tradition and identity that's rooted in something real and old and that's passed down. And it's all like, hey man, we're all just gonna go back to the one anyways, you know. So like, it's like hippie Jesus too, right? Like, just generally be a good person and don't hurt anybody and do whatever you want. And Andrew is probably one of the best in the world at arguing against that worldview, because he constantly puts up internal critiques that prove all the contradictions in that worldview. And then the low IQ people think he's actually defending those things, and they don't understand it.
I've been saying for 5 years now that liberalism is the art of stacking mental contradictions, and all it takes is one little pink and it all falls down. For me, It was the George Floyd protest, watching that outside my window in Montreal, Quebec, holding my newborn daughter, and being at that point still an atheist in that sort of skeptic kind of school mind. Although I've been softening, and all it took was that watching that, and my brain went boom, doesn't compute. 404, couldn't deal with it, and
Yeah.
because eventually you just reach a terminal point where either you go crazy or you go back to God, or maybe a bit of both. Rachel, we're at the hour mark. How much longer do we have you for? A little bit longer, or
I can do
I
a
don't want
little longer. Yeah.
Okay, I don't want to keep you forever. I want to read out some super chats. Let's throw this one last thought up before we start to wrap it up. What got me to this idea that liberalism is equals Luciferianism, it's in the name. René Girard again once said, the universal human desire is for transcendence. We always look for transcendence, and liberalism always promises that, right? To liberate ourselves from all oppression. When it begins to attach itself to the metaphysic, what ends up happening is we start to liberate ourselves from categories, even states of being. And I think the ultimate act, because it is Luciferian, is to liberate ourselves from the image bearer of God. And this is why we're into very treacherous waters, especially with transhumanism and all the rest of it, because that image bearer status is really what I think Lucifer wants us to give up in one way, shape, or form. We saw this in Romania they were trying to separate man from God completely through a lot of the horrible things that the Romanian government were doing in secret prisons.
Yes.
Perverse Eucharists, all the rest of it. There seems to be this desire within this group to liberate ourselves from that responsibility and duty as the image bearer of God, and all their categories that come with it. So famously, I always end my shows with a quote from Father Seraphim Rose, which is, "It's later than you think." The full quote is, "Brothers, it is later than you think. Hasten, therefore, to do the work of God."
To do the work of God.
We've laid out a lot in this episode, the roots of the issue and its parallels. So I'd like to hear from you, Rachel, and Jim as well. Solutions, possible remedies for this course of action. And I'll throw this one out because I go back and forth about the responsibility of men for this kind of situation. We are inheriting the sins of our fathers and of different ages, right? There's generational guilt here. And this clues into the vengeful son spirit, where people are being onboarded to this deceit and this empire of lies, and many people are now going to find scapegoats and act out in vengeance and in anger. Why I ask people to model the prodigal son, to return, repent, redeem, is it requires a whole bunch of humility to understand that we are all in some ways carrying some of this guilt and blame and sin, and we must find another way to humble ourselves and to submit to something higher than ourselves, even to the point of, when I first had Father John Whiteford on, I was a little bit shocked, because when I asked him to come on the show, he's like, "I have to go check with my bishop first." And there's a little thing, right? And it's like, oh, I never thought he would have to do that, right? And he was like, "It won't be a problem." But we were talking about Pashka, so I thought it was an easy one. But he still had to check with his bishop. It's submission to authority that I think is missing in this world, and it's on to us as men, right? Any men listening to this, and the majority of my audience, to begin to submit to something true. The good, the beautiful, the true has to be submitted to in some way, shape, or form, and without expecting reward. Because what oftentimes happens, you'll hear people go, "Well, if you model this and you do this, then the women will want you." But now you're begging the reward. The reward is getting good with God. That's the reward. Everything else that follows is just everything else. So I'll shut up.
So what you're saying is, first and foremost, don't be a simp.
Are you Kathy Newming me, Rachel? Are you Kathy Newming me on my own show? My goodness.
No,
yes.
Anytime
I'm saying don't be a simp.
I can condemn simping, I'm here for it. But you're right when you talked about submitting to authority, because when we were just talking about Ayn Rand, I made a little note to myself about how the classical liberals, like the James Lindsay type, they're constantly fear-mongering. Jordan Peterson does this too. A lot of the neocons do this. They will constantly fear-monger you about the threat of tyranny. Now, I'm not saying that tyranny isn't a real threat. Sure it is. But they'll use that to basically make you think that all hierarchy is bad, that any form of submission to authority is bad because it'll be um it will be exploitative. You'll be exploited if you submit. And this is a very Americanist mindset to have. It's a very feminist mindset to have, that we must rebel against all authority, and that the answer to the world's problems is to just get rid of authority and make everyone equal, which is not even possible. But it doesn't, even if you could do that, it wouldn't, because you and I, both of you guys and I know, that's not the real root of evil. The root of the problem is not authority in and of itself. It's people's evil desires and people being slaves to their passions. So the only way out of that is to submit to what is good and what is God's design. And for women, if you say the word submission to women at all, they are programmed, literally mentally programmed, with a knee-jerk reaction to freak out if they hear the word submission. I'm not going to submit. What do you mean, like a slave? You're not going to tell me what to do. I'm going to do my own thing. And it's like a knee-jerk reaction now. So even if you have a great man who's a good husband, who's going to lead you to a great life, you will rebel against that and destroy your own self and destroy your own life. And I've seen it happen so many times. I almost did it myself when I was young. By the grace of God, I caught it and went, what am I doing? And got my crap together. But don't let yourself be fear-mongered by liberals into thinking that all submission is bad. It's just that because you're going to submit to something. So imagine a promiscuous woman who rejects husbands. This is the common thing. Girls in their 20s, they're like, I'm not going to settle down. I'm way too young to get married. I'm going to play the field. I'm going to have fun. I'm going to have my hot girl summer. And then when I'm 35 and I'm approaching the wall, I'll take the best deal I can get at that point, when I'm scared of being alone and realizing that I don't have enough savings and living alone with my cats isn't what it was cracked up to be. And then they want it. But what you realize is that they've been submitting all along, but they've been submitting to corporations, to the government, to the sisterhood that tells them to rack up the bodies and sleep with all the men and just use birth control or get abortions if you have a surprise pregnancy. You've still submitted and you've destroyed yourself in the process, when you could have submitted to something that was going to help you grow and aid you in your salvation. God didn't design marriage to oppress women. He designed it to help save us from our rebellious nature and our rebellious impulses, and to put us under, the safety and provision of the man he created us for. We were created for men. So all I'm trying to do, I know people probably see me on Twitter and think I'm so mean, but all I'm trying to do is get that message through as much as I can. And sometimes I don't have a choice. I can't be super gentle. I try when I can to be gentle and help people talk about it and work it through, but I get met with so much animosity because of the programming that sometimes I just have to punch through it like with a sledgehammer, and there's not really another way that it's going to work. And I know that the women who email me and message me every day saying, hey, I used to be this way, I used to think this way, you totally changed my mind. It was a really rough realization. It wasn't easy to accept that I'd been completely lied to and told, all kinds of lies and practically ruined my life. But thank you, because I'm going to try to turn it around. It's heartbreaking when I get those messages from women in their 60s and they say, I can't go back and I can't change it. I fell for the whole thing and now I'm alone and I'm old and I don't have children and I blew it. I blew my whole life up for this lie. So I'm trying to save as many people from that as I can. But I think that in the long term, feminism can't last. And the reason is because we are on the precipice of a birth rate crisis that is so bad. In South Korea, the average woman has 0.7 children. The average South Korean woman isn't bothering to replace herself, let alone a mate. That is civilization ending. We've never seen it before in human history, and most of the world is well below replacement and has been for decades. So that will probably cause some type of collapse that's going to be bad enough that women will voluntarily go back to the kitchen, as it were. I'm hoping it doesn't have to get that bad. I'm hoping I always say the correction's going to be painful, but I hope that it's just painful and not like civilization ending. But that's why I'm out here trying to do this stuff. I have 4 daughters and I'm going to have grandkids. So
Yeah.
I care
Except
about
the
the
people
world
running
they're
things.
going to live in.
the people running things, at least in the developed country, have at least a near-term solution to that, and that's the Great Replacement. They'll just import our replacements from the third world. Maybe their fertility will drop off at some point in the future, but for the short term, we're toast. And in other words, I think they feel they can stave off that collapse by bringing our replacements in to sort of fill in our gaps while the rest of us disappear.
Yes.
I mean, this is something that Matthew Erickson and I have been developing. We started developing last year. I call it civilizational capital, but the starting position is this: you no longer live in a civilization. You have to take that. You have to take that position. You have all the civilizational stuff, right? You have, trains and all these wonderful gadgets and whatever like that. But the thing that actually makes a civilization is no longer with us. We've liberated ourselves from these categories. I call it the regio, a region, a ruler, and a religion. That binds this idea, that these subcategories of political, social, and economic capital together, that they work together and create things. So you go from a small fishing village that gets really, really good at producing fish and all the other things that are associated with fish and markets and all the rest of it. And across enough time with enough right investments, you get the Portuguese. And I'm interested in that, how that happens. Right. And that happens, I think, by this regio, something that binds the people together to do a project, to build cathedrals, do all these wonderful things. You need that binding agent, and you need there's always going to be conflict. It's part of our fallen nature. We are conflicted beings. We will wrestle with God. We will wrestle with ourselves. But yet we have to sometimes put those things aside so we can have a greater project. And if we're bereft of that project, then it becomes cannibalistic. We just tear it apart.
Yeah, but you can't. I don't think it can be just a project. I mean, again, back to Korea. I mean, historically, or even prehistorically, what's held societies together are just the uncontrived, organic self-awareness of the ties among a society that, we have the same ancestors, we speak the same language, we have the same religion, we share the same cultural assumptions, we have the same moral values. And of course, the real tragedy is when you're talking about a place like Korea, where people do share all those things, and they're still collapsing. And I don't know that a project is going to fix it. I mean, I've got a different concept. Maybe we need is a campaign that says, "Say no to butt stuff." If the butt stuff is so to speak, if the butt stuff is, so to speak, the bottom line.
The bottom line is butt stuff. I'm going to text Andrew right now and tell him we need a T-shirt that says "Just say no to butt stuff" in the merch store.
Well, by the way, I don't know if you noticed, I was trying to keep them cracking up, because when you started on the butt stuff, I was thinking about the South Park version of the human centipede, and that was something else that I didn't have.
Okay, let's read out some super chats, and we'll get some final thoughts.
Say no to butt stuff.
Blue Skittle 9.99. Rachel is the goat. She is the goat, which is the spirit animal of the show. I might be the goat father, but Rachel is the goat. Okay. Nathan KB $2. I smoked too. Let's hit the goal. Well, thank you very much. Probably responding to me smoking constantly throughout the stream. Buck Johnson 49. Buck the stuff. Rachel, thanks for doing what you do. It's very needed. And Colomark has sent out 10 Marin Chuck Now gift certificates. I'm just checking through. I think they're missing some super chats. There was some questions before. Red Fox $100 essentially. It's a super chat. Thank you so much, Red Fox. Rachel, my wife and I are big fans. We bought your book multiple times and give it as presents. Thank you all for what you do. Thank you so much, Red Fox, and thank you for all you do. Well, man, y'all member for 18 months. Submit your super chats and also sign up, folks. $2 gets you on the Miran Chad level. Sorry, the Miran Chud level of the show. So we appreciate all the new subscriptions. I'm just trying to see if I think I'm missing something. Let me just scroll up very quickly. If I'm missing you, I'm sorry. We'll try to.
Well, I interrupted. You were talking about the project there, Jason.
Yeah, sorry. And Suki Bazuki for Australian $5. I have your book arriving soon, Rachel. Looking forward to reading it. You've already changed my views on so many things. Thank you for all you do. Thank you,
Oh,
Rachel.
thanks, guys. You
See?
guys are so nice this evening. I appreciate you.
Well, see, you come on the right show, Rach. We attract the nice people. I
You're
block all
just
the
tired of looking at me and Jason.
yeah, well, yeah, exactly. Yeah, my pretty days are gone. Those days are days are long gone. I kind of have to stop with my tooth falling out. Truth Sauce, $10. Thank you, Rachel, for your contribution to humanity. Just say no to butt stuff, and I want to pray for the world. At this time, things are getting a bit worrisome. Absolutely. Let's send a prayer to the world. I'm sorry if I'm missing anyone. I'm sorry. It seems to be cut off from some of the notifications. I'll try to find more. But of course, the people on Kick, send your memberships and your likes and all the rest of it. We are also on Kick and trying to get that monetized, because Kick is where it's where the conversation is going to go. Rachel, you might want to tell your husband about that. That's it looks like that's going to be the new major streaming platform, if we're reading the cards right. So, final thoughts on connections of it's interesting, because I thought about this. Obviously, we're talking a lot of people who are watching the show, and I expect most of the people who are watching the show, we're preaching to the choir a little bit. At the same time, and I think someone did mention this in the chat, the point of going on to whatever and all these other places and bring these conversations to people is not to win the debate. It's to start to interject that doubt in people's minds.
Yes.
Because we're at an inflection point. And I believe I think we're going into very, very hard times. Very hard times. And I've recommended this to people right now. If you have a conflict in your family, end it now. Right? Whatever you have to do, end it. Make sure you figure out a way. Silence that conflict. Get your family together and get right with it. Choose your king now and do it now. We're about to enter the bad times. This is it. We were seeing the Iran or Israel, all the rest of it. This is all build up, right? The prophecies from the Orthodox Church are coming true. Go watch Conrad on World War Now to find out more about that. This is the part of the roller coaster where we're at the top, and it's about to go down. This is not a black pill. It's just simply like, you got to get this stuff sorted out now, because as we've learned in 2020, that's why I keep telling people, it's like, what if you knew in 2019 everything that was going to happen in 2020? You may not be able to change anything. You're not going to be able to affect anything, but at least you knew. How much time and worry and BS would you have saved yourself in the first year? I'm just talking to myself, where you're like, what? Hair on fire, everything's, what's going on, when you can at least get your head straight. And then by doing that, then you have more direction. So I'm saying all this to say thank you, Rachel, and thank you to Andrew and Jim Bob and Jay Dyer and many others who I believe are doing this work at an inflection point. And to your point, Rachel, and I'll just throw this to you, you've mentioned this now multiple times on multiple places, that feminism is held together because it's kind of peacetime and things are going to get rough. So what's your recommendation for women listening to this? Because I think that this message, especially the connection to communism, has to cut into conservative women, the anti-communist crowd, the what's her name from Fox News, the Megyn Kelly crew, right? I don't expect her to change colors overnight, but maybe. But
you jump scared Jim when you said Megyn Kelly. He was like, "Oh." Yeah,
she has nice legs.
There are worse.
I suppose, but the thing about the conservative women who are feminists is it's so insidious. It's so insidious. I remember before I was ever anybody on the internet, I was arguing in a Facebook group about this stuff. I've been doing this stuff forever because when I decided to be a mom instead of be a go to work mom, ladies, if you're a stay-at-home mom, don't call yourself that. You're a mom. The women who work all day and drop their kids at daycare, they're stay-at-work moms, okay? So when I decided not to be a stay-at-work mom,
I love it.
yeah, When I
That's
decided I
good.
didn't want to do that, I was arguing in a Facebook group with a Candace Owens staffer. This was maybe 2012 or something when she
Mhm.
first got popular. And this woman was a Republican and told me that I was bad because I wasn't contributing to the GDP. I wasn't being a good conservative. You have to realize, first of all, that there's no conservative women in politics. They practically don't exist. If they were conservative, they probably wouldn't be career boss babe girls in politics. That's why I don't get invited to the
Mhm.
TPUSA conference to speak at the Women's Leadership Summit, because I would simply tell them, why don't you have men speak at the Women's Leadership Summit, since the men are supposed to be doing the leadership? So I'll never get invited. But that aside,
Yeah, I bet.
as
Would you
far
want
as
to be
what
there
women,
though? Really? Would you want to be there? Would you really want to be there?
I
You,
would debate
Really?
all of them at once. I'd be like,
Oh
come
yeah,
get
for
some.
the debate. Yeah, for the debate. Yeah, for sure.
I would
you're not
challenge
a
all
big
of them
Tony
on
Lahren
everything.
fan, then, huh?
Exactly. I would go,
Yeah.
I would just eat their lunch, all of them. It would be so great. It would be
This is
glorious.
true.
But I'll never get
or just
invited.
deadlift
So
them. Yeah.
yeah, I'll just have to
Well, they worship the
fantasize
GDP. They
about it.
worship the free market. You know, I mean, they're basically corporations.
Yeah, they are. And what I would say to women is, you need to understand that if you were born after 1960, you have grown up breathing feminist air and swimming in feminist water. You probably have no idea how deeply it runs within you and how ingrained the programming is. Like I said, there's some easy tests. If you hear the word submission, do you instantly go, like, without even thinking about it? Does it just instantly cause you to, what do you mean? Do you feel like you need to have your own money and you can't rely on a man, that staying at home and raising your kids yourself would mean that you're a loser who can't compete in the workplace and you never did anything with your life? Do you listen to a lot of Taylor Swift and Beyonce, perhaps? There's some clues, but most, like all of us, I'm same with me. I had to deprogram a lot of this stuff from myself when I started to realize this and put things together. I had to look at my own self and my own thoughts and behaviors and beliefs and start questioning them and
Mm-hmm.
changing the way that I acted and the way that I talked to my husband, small things. And what I'll tell you is, I can't give you ladies a magic crystal ball that can show you how much better life is over here on the patriarchy side. I can't express it to you. I can't convince you of it. It's something you have to experience for yourself. But when you give up the feminist mindset, when you stop wrestling with yourself, when you stop fighting the men in your life who love you and want to help you and take care of you and let you be a woman and allow you to focus your energies on motherhood and taking care of your family and your church and your community, and being women were the builders of those things. This is why we have no
Mm-hmm.
family cohesion anymore. This is why everyone's so atomized. It's why all the old folks are being raised by Nigerian immigrants, and the children are being raised by Mexican immigrants. The women are not doing what we were made to do. We're all going off to cubicles and telling ourselves that working is the most fun thing ever, that we love our 40-hour-a-week job and paying the income taxes. I'm just telling you, if what I'm saying sounds crazy and it puts you off and you're not sure and you're like, but I love working and I love my independence, just try as a test to not talk to the men in your life with a disrespectful attitude or challenge them on everything, to not have that knee-jerk reaction to challenge them anytime they say anything to you, and just see what happens, because it's like magic. It's like a magical curtain gets drawn away and you get to be. I'm a tomboy, by the way. I'm not even like this ultra. I'm the weirdest person in some ways to be pushing this message, because I'm not like super dainty in feminism, feminine. I'm a tomboy. I was raised out in the
Girly girl.
country on
Yeah.
farms. Yeah, I love lifting weights and shooting guns and arguing and debating, not very normal female stuff. But ditching all the feminism stuff helped me realize, like, I found out I love being a mother. I love nurturing and taking care of babies and children. I can't wait to be a grandma. I'm excited to get older. I don't fear getting older. I don't fear losing my sexual prowess and my ability to manipulate the men around me with my sexuality, because I I'm excited to be a grandma. I'm excited to have more time to volunteer at church and do more things in my parish. And it just changes your life. You'll have peace that you never had before. It's better over here. Join us on Team Patriarchy and give it a try, and you're gonna feel less anxiety, and you're gonna be less depressed. I don't know if you guys have ever seen, but there are 2 huge studies that they've done, the paradox of female happiness, and then a follow-up study that was done a few years later, where they looked all over the world and found that to the extent that you liberate women is the extent to which they are more miserable. And it doesn't matter what culture, what race, what economic background, what religion, anything. So just out of
Yeah,
personal interest, self-interest for yourself, just try it. That's my
But
take.
but Rachel,
helps the
but Rachel,
but
GDP, Rachel,
yeah,
GDP. Sorry.
Also GDP, because it adds to the pharmaceutical industry's GDP,
Right.
portion of the GDP, because all these women are on meds.
I think we're at 27% of adult women in America are on at least one psychiatric prescription drug now. That's a lot.
GDP.
So
yeah,
Everything's so great that you have to be medicated to enjoy it.
exactly.
Ladies and gentlemen, mesdames, messieurs, thank you so much. Final pitches. Of course, Jim Jatras, go buy his book, I Tried to Warn You. Links in the description below, both on Amazon, Kindle, and many other booksellers. Rachel Wilson, her book, remind me the title again. I want to keep calling it Occult Feminism, but I know there's a
Occult feminism is fine. If you Google that, it comes up. It's kind of long. It's Occult Feminism, the Secret History of Women's Liberation, because everything you've been told about how that went down is a lie. You've been lied to. So get the book if you want to see all the proof in black and white.
And the bitter white pill here is, once you understand that you've been lied to, it's easier to admit that you're wrong, because it's not just your fault. It's your fault.
Not.
It's your fault. In technically, you have to take responsibility for your life and all the rest of it. But it's not your fault that you were lied to and you believe the lie, because everything substantiates a lie, like, dinosaurs, because they have feathers now. But that's a different conversation. Of course, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for all your support. Go ahead,
I got a question. Yeah. Rachel, what do you tell those women who contact you when it is too late for them personally, in terms of what they can do to salvage something from their lives? Okay, they can't get in their time machine, they can't get married and have kids and all that, but they can do something productive with their lives at that point. What would you advise them?
I'm hoping Rachel answers with going full Hamlet and get thee to a nunnery.
No.
Sorry, I don't.
I think, in other words, they need to be able to make a positive contribution, perhaps to other people's normal family life, in a way that they could derive some satisfaction from themselves.
Yes. Yeah. The first thing I ask them is if they are Christian. If they're Orthodox, even better, because but even if you're Protestant or you're Roman Catholic or something, your church is your family too. And the churches, every church everywhere in this country desperately needs women who are willing to help younger women, help the parish, help with kids, help in any way that they can. We used to have matrons in this society, and it's one of the things we are desperately lacking. The Bible talks about older women. Don't be drunk with wine, because your job is to be teaching and helping the younger women, teaching them the proper way to be, giving them good advice, dispensing your wisdom. And if you've learned from your mistakes, a great thing you can do is dispense your wisdom to the younger women around you, and be like, hey, I see you doing or thinking this. I used to do and think that too. It didn't work out for me, and this is what I've learned from it, and maybe think about, not doing that. And you can find a lot of purpose.
Mentorship then,
yeah, you can find a lot of purpose in taking on that role, especially within the context of your church community and your family. Even if you don't have your own children, you probably have nieces and nephews,
like extended family.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's, as Christians especially, that's really where our meaning comes from, is from serving others. It's from denying ourselves and serving others. And if your life is all about you, it's very hard to feel fulfilled, and you will tend to be depressed.
Yeah, that's great.
I think that's perfect. Rachel, thank you so much for coming on. Jim, always a pleasure. We do this show every Tuesday at between 9 and 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, depending. We'll be back next week. Keep an eye out. We have some interesting guests possibly lined up. And Rachel and Jim, if you don't mind, stick around. We'll talk after the show. Ladies and gentlemen, mesdames and messieurs, thank you so much. Appreciate each and every one of you. I am Jason Marinchuk, and it's later than you think.